Welcome to our second to last class on Israel. And today is Yom HaZikaron, Israel Remembrance Day, and then it transforms into Yom HaAtzmaut. So that's one interesting thing about the Jewish calendar is that we first commemorate the fallen soldiers, and then the very next day, which means tonight, as the day starts at night, we, in the same ceremony, we memorialize the fallen soldiers and then celebrate the land of Israel. So we experience the bitterness and then the sweetness in one ceremony. So that's now in Israel. So we're going to get a little background about Israel and the Zionist movement. And then from there, we have some special guests who are going to call in from Israel. And so we're going to learn about contemporary Israel, both through our academic lesson and then firsthand from some guests who live in the land of Israel, who made Aliyah. We'll go from there. All right, so the most famous and important quote about Israel is right here, Theodore Herzl. We're going to learn a little bit about him today. If you will it, it is no dream. Right? And so that's what the Zionist movement is all about. That's what the birth of Israel is all about. It was a dream to go back to the land of Israel. And it was a dream of Theodore Herzl's. And he made it happen. He made it happen. And just by his own will, right? And so that's a lesson for us too. We use it in contemporary Judaism for the same reasons, right? We can achieve our dreams if we put enough effort into it. Israel, a great dream from the beaches of Tel Aviv to Jerusalem's Western Wall, right? We'll explore the complicated and beautiful story of the land of Israel. People, land, and state. So there's three concepts. Am Yisrael, which means the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, the people of Israel. Eretz Yisrael is the land of Israel, the physical earth. And then Medinat Yisrael is the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel. Right? So Am Yisrael refers to all of us together in the diaspora and in Israel. Something like 80% of Jews on the globe live either in Israel or in America. We are the two great Jewish communities on the globe. Right? Of course, there are Jews everywhere you go, but these are the two great Jewish communities. And just like back in the day, right, we had Babylonian community and the Jerusalem community that wrote these amazing tomes of Talmud. The same is true here. We have two different communities, and we live in a long distance relationship, right? So literally, this takes many hours to get from place to place. We speak different languages. We practice Judaism in very different ways. Right? We have denominations here in America, our Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform, plus a few more. In Israel, they don't have that. That's not the way things break down. Things break down into sort of ultra-Orthodox, religious Zionist, just traditional Masorati, right? And then Chiloni, just secular, right? And secular Jews too aren't quite like secular Jews in America, right? Secular Jews in America are assimilated and don't practice Judaism at all. In Israel, right? Secular Jews are living on a Jewish calendar. Right, their time off work on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right? That's how they live their lives on the Jewish calendar. And they speak the Hebrew language, and they usually attend a Pesach Seder and fast on they don't fast on Yom Kippur, but they take the day off on Yom Kippur. And right, so it's just a very different model of Jewish community. And it's tough when Israelis come to America and they walk into a non-Orthodox synagogue where there's no mechitza, no division between men and women, and there's microphones and singing, together. that's just not, they're shocked. That's not how Judaism is supposed to be practiced, right? And it takes a really long time for them to get used to it. The same is true for us, right? Going over to Israel, there are some harsh realities. Number one, they don't really recognize the conservative and reform movements. And so that's hard for us rabbis and leaders and members of the conservative and reform communities. And so there's really, it's difficult relationship. It's a strained relationship. And so it's tough, but altogether we are Am Yisrael, as divided as we sometimes are into denominations and into global communities. We are still one people. They say Am Echad im Lev Echad, one people with one heart. As long as we remember that, right? We're different limbs of the same body, right? And if one limb is suffering, everybody's suffering. We are one people with one heart. Eretz Yisrael is the land of Israel, is the physical earth of Israel. And when we go to Israel, we can walk in the footsteps of our ancestors. This was the place, right, that the Holy Temple stood on Mount Zion. This was the place, right, that Abraham and Sarah are buried in Hebron. This is the place where our ancestors walked and fought and lived and loved. It's just an amazing thing for anyone who's been there. If you haven't been there, go there. To walk in the Bible is just an amazing thing. Then the land of Israel, the earth, is also considered holy. Mount of Olives, people are buried there. They fly from everywhere on the globe to be buried in the land of Israel, because the earth of Israel is considered holy. So it's not only the spirit, it's the earth, it's the space, it's the place. So that's Eretz Yisrael. And then we have Medinat Yisrael, which is the parliament, the Knesset. 1948 was the beginning of Medinat Yisrael, which means the modern state of Israel. And so we have these three concepts of what it means, right, to be Jewish, right, to be in a peoplehood, right, all together, to have a Jewish space, Eretz Yisrael, carved out on the earth for us to live in, and then the state of Israel, which is our political body that governs the state of Israel. My heart is in the east, and I am at the ends of the west, right? Yehuda Halevi wrote this beautiful poem. We have always had a connection with Israel for hundreds of generations. We have always prayed for Israel. We have always dreamed of being in Israel. Lashana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, and every Passover Seder. And so we've always had this emotional connection with the land of Israel. Right, and here's a general map, right, and has empty spaces for you to guess what's what, right? So we have Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, and as you can see, it's right in the middle of the country. And it was chosen by King David as the space for the Holy Temple and the capital of Israel because of its centrality. And originally it didn't belong to any tribes. He bought it from Hittite, I believe. And it didn't belong to any tribe. And so it's another reason so it could be fair, you know, that no tribe would own the capital city. Tel Aviv is a beach town up here, right? Haifa is on the port up here. And right, we've got Eilat down in the bottom, a resort town, the Galilee, and the Sea of Galilee is around here. So here's a beautiful map of Israel. The West Bank, as you can see, is in black on this map. And the Gaza Strip is over here. And it's also on the beach. Right? And the West Bank is here. All right, this is the Negev, right? The desert lands of Israel. By the rivers of Babylon. Right? By the rivers of Babylon, right? We've always prayed for in the diaspora, it's sad, right? We have this sadness in the diaspora. They say that you know, the Shekhinah, God's intimate presence, was with us when the temple stood. But when the temple was destroyed and we were sent in the diaspora, right, we can't feel God's presence as we once did. It's a very sad concept of longing to get back to Israel. And so this was the Babylonian exile. Let's start there. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. Among the weeping willows, we hung our harps. We didn't want to sing anymore. Right? And that concept continued for a very long time in Judaism. No singing ever since the temple was destroyed. Right? We don't use musical instruments. We didn't use the musical instruments for a very long time when we prayed because the temple was so full of music and joy. We can no longer celebrate like we once did. It's as if we're in mourning, right, for the temple always. Right? And so we hung our harps up and we gave up our singing and our playing, but our captors demanded that we sing a song. Right? They would torture us, right? And say, you know what, sing that song about Zion. And they forced us to sing, which is a really odd thing. And we answered, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Right? We can't sing. We're so, this tragedy doesn't allow us to sing. If I forget you, Jerusalem, let me forget my right hand. Right? We're never going to forget the fall of the temple. We're never going to forget our homeland is where we belong. Right? And so many believe, right, that we were always in mourning, and even now, right, the state of Israel is with us, but there are some sort of ultra-Orthodox folks that still believe, well, the Messiah hasn't come yet, the temple isn't rebuilt, and so we're still in mourning, right? And right, the question is, do we fast on the days that we were, experienced tragedies, getting kicked out of Jerusalem? Now that we're back, right, the conservative movement says, and the reform movement say, we don't fast anymore. We're done mourning. The tragedy is over because we've reclaimed the land of Israel. And so a lot of Am Yisrael, a lot of the people of Israel celebrate that we are here. We are experiencing the sort of beginnings of the Messianic era because we're once again whole and praying for peace, right? And there are others that say, no, we've got a long way to go before we achieve peace and get out of our mourning. Psalm 126, right? And we always dreamed of going back to the temple as pilgrims, right? The pilgrimage to the Holy Temple, up the stairs. First up the mountain. Jerusalem is on a mountain. And also we ascended the steps. So it's called the Song of Ascending, Shir LaMa'alot. And we sing it before we do grace after meals every Shabbat. Shir LaMa'alot B'shuv Adonai. This is the song that we sing, that we remember our longing for being in Israel. When God restores the exiles of Zion, we will be like dreamers, right? On that day, one day we will return to the land of Israel, and it'll be like we're living a dream because we've longed for it and wanted it for so long. It's going to be like a hazy dream. Our mouths will fill with laughter and our tongues with joyful song. All will be well in the world. It will be said among the nations, God has done great things for them, right? While we're in exile, we're degraded, and our reputation, God's reputation, is at stake. God will do great things for us, and we'll have joy. Restore us, Adonai, is the prayer, like streams of water to the desert. The ones who sow in tears shall reap with songs of joy. Right? We who are suffering and longing and crying will one day, it'll turn around and we will reap with songs of joy. Right? Our sowing will be worthwhile and will end in joy. There he goes along weeping, carrying his bag of seed, right? He will come with joy, carrying his sheaves, right? We will still be carrying our load, but we will come with joy one day, right? And the day has arrived, right? And so we commemorate Yom HaZikaron, all the fallen soldiers, all that sadness, all that time in diaspora. And now we're about to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, our independence. What an amazing miracle that the modern state of Israel is. Right? This is Israel's national anthem, our StarSpangled Banner. And I'm saying our, which is nice, right? Because I have a stake in the land of Israel. I have family. We all have a stake in the land of Israel. So right, it's important to us to refer to Israel as ours, right? It's ours. As long as deep within the heart, a Jewish soul stirs and forward to the ends of the east, and eye looks out towards Zion. We look towards Zion, and God looks towards Zion. Our hope is not yet lost. Right? And it was written in the diaspora. Right? Our hope is not yet lost, and it's called Hatikva, right? Which it means hope. Our hope is not yet lost. The hope of 2,000 years to be a free people in our land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem. Right? And so we sing, right? We sing our song of hope. And I think that's important because we know that the work isn't over. There is still strife and war and hate and anger today in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel, and in the land of Israel, and the people of Israel. And so our hope is still with us. Right? And I'm going to sort of review the timeline quickly because I want to get to the modern state of Israel and what's happening there today and tonight. It all starts back in Europe, right? It was a dream back in Europe. Moses Hess writes Rome and Jerusalem, which is the first widely distributed Zionist book in Europe, right? And then we go around the timeline, right? People start coming back to Israel, right? We have Petah Tikva, right? Some of the cities get founded. 1878, which is a long time to be waiting to 1948, right? We started populating Israel. In 1881, Eliezer ben Yehuda, the father of modern Hebrew language, makes Aliyah. Hebrew was only in prayers books. Hebrew was only in the Bible. There was no spoken language of Hebrew. Right? We're speaking Aramaic, we're speaking Yiddish, we're speaking German and Polish and all over the globe, we were speaking the diaspora language. And when we used Hebrew, it was ancient Hebrew, right? We weren't speaking modern Hebrew. And so Eliezer ben Yehuda, right, creates a modern Hebrew language. Yes, some of the roots are the same, but it's sort of like a Shakespeare, right? Shakespeare to modern English. You can't really understand it without a guide, right? And so it's a very different language than in the Bible and in our prayer books. And then the first wave of Aliyah, composed of Jews from Eastern Europe and Yemen, start coming. And then finally in 1890, it becomes official. The term Zionism is coined over here. And then the Dreyfus Affair in 1894, where Dreyfus is a French military man, and Theodore Herzl is a reporter and goes over to cover the story and for an Austrian newspaper. And he becomes convinced. That was the moment where he becomes convinced that Dreyfus was framed. It was obviously a unjust trial, and he was framed. And it happened because he had, that was Herzl's take. It happened because he was a Jew. He was a well-known Jew and high up in the army. And it was clear to everybody there that this was a case of Jews not being welcome around the globe. And he publishes his first major pamphlet called The Jewish State. And that's the dream. That's the dream that came true. The Zionist Congress starts to meet in 1897. Right? And 1909, finally, we get to Israel, we start founding kibbutzim. Doing this quickly here. 1917, the British Army gets control from the Ottoman Empire and creates the Balfour Declaration, which means here we are. The British own the land, and they call it a British mandate because they knew it was temporary. Right? They weren't there. They understood that one day they were going to leave, and the Haganah is established. Right, we start organizing ourselves militarily, and a lot of the leaders, starting in 1948, came out of this resistance movement. Finally, in 1947, the UN, right after the Holocaust, right, and There was empathy around the globe for what the Jewish people had gone through in Europe. And that's part of the reason in 1947, the UN approves the United Nations, the resolution, which would split what they call Palestine into two states, one Arab and one Jewish. So they set up like a war, right, in that declaration. Here's your side and here's your side. And they were, the borders were right there, right? And these enemies that have been fighting for decades, right? Here you go, here's your land and here's your land, and they took off, right? Which resulted in 1948. As soon as they established the state of Israel, I did it again. As soon as we established the state of Israel, the very next day, 5 Arab countries declared war: Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, right? And so that was the day after they knew they were heading into war when they declared the state of Israel. Ben-Gurion becomes the first prime minister, and we established the law of return, which means that Jews can come back to their land. Right? And here we go. This is the Constitution. Some things were of note. Let's start from the beginning a little bit. Eretz Yisrael was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here, their spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. This is the place where we were born, where Judaism was born. Right? After being exiled from our land, right, et cetera, et cetera. Here we go. The state of Israel will be open for immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants, right? Not only Jews, but all of it. That's in our charter, right? It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex, right? Very democratic and open, right? This is how it was founded. This is how the state of Israel was founded, on this principle of democracy and freedom for all. We extend our hand to all neighboring states to offer peace and good neighborliness, right? And appeal to them to establish bonds of cooperation and mutual help, right? The intentions and the foundation was amazing, right? And open and pluralistic and democratic. And then the modern Israel timeline begins, right? The War of Independence takes 2 years. The law of return is passed. And then in 67, in the Six-Day War, Israel triples in size, right? It was amazing. And right, we recaptured the Kotel Hamaravi, the Western Wall, which was not in Jordanian territory. We couldn't visit the wall up until 1967. And then in 67, there was an amazing victory all the way down through the Sinai, all the way up to the Golan, and then slowly through, right, war and peace treaties that got stripped away from Israel. And so that's what caused some of the controversy, right? So we're in 67, we expand our borders and then negotiated back down. And some of these territories are still in conflict. Right? We didn't give them away, didn't give them back completely. We still maintain authority and governance in some of these places. And so that causes some of the tension and the controversy that we're not going to get into today. You can, look it up online and do some research. What we are going to talk about is contemporary life in Israel, what's happening today, right? And especially the relationship between American Jews and Israeli Jews, and how that functions, right, in real time. We'll end this section, right, with a beautiful poem by Yehuda Amichai, right, who experiences the tourist industry, right, is strong in Israel. People come from all over, Christians, Jews, Muslims, everybody comes on pilgrimage to the land of Israel. And Yehuda Amichai watches, the tourists coming, and this is his reflection. Visits of condolences are all we get from them. They squat at the Holocaust Memorial. They put on grave faces at the Wailing Wall. and they laugh behind heavy curtains in their hotels, right? That happens, right? We can resonate with that. They have their pictures taken together with our famous dead at Rachel's tomb, at Herzl's tomb, on Ammunition Hill. They weep over our sweet boys and lust after our tough girls and hang up their underwear to quickly dry in cool blue bathrooms. Once, I sat on the steps by a gate at David's Tower. I placed my 2 heavy baskets at my side. A group of tourists was standing around their guide, and I became their target marker. You see that man with the baskets? Just right of his head, there's an arch from the Roman period, just right above his head. But he's moving, I said to myself. Redemption will come only if their guide tells them, you see that arch from the Roman period? It's not important, but next to it and left down a bit, there sits a man who's brought fruit and vegetables for his family. Right? Redemption will come, says Yehuda Amichai, when we recognize that there are people living and breathing in the state of Israel. And we not only go there for historical purposes, for archaeological purposes, but we go there to meet the people. Right? And there are, plenty of programs in Israel that do just that, right? They do some touring and then they have dinner at someone's house, right? And get to know them. And that's Yehuda Amichai's take on America's relationship with Israel, right? We need to get it personal. We need to renew our bonds. We have to become one people, Am Yisrael, in the land of Israel. All right, friends, our special guest is here, Maya Teller, right? And so she and her roommates are here to tell us a little bit about their journey from America to Israel. Right? Is that right? Did all of you journey from America to Israel?
Yes,
Okay.
we did. Oh,
all right. So there you go. So Yehuda Amichai right, comments that, not only should we be learning about the history of Israel, but we should also be meeting the people of Israel, right? Like Yehuda Amichai and like these 3 beautiful young women. All right. So if you don't mind, introduce yourselves and we'll start there.
All right, I'm Maya. And this is Abigail and Sophie.
Hey.
Hi.
Abigail and Sophie. Well, thanks for being here in our Exploring Judaism class. I have to warn you, it's being recorded. A lot of people watch after the fact. I just wanted to let you know, no pressure. And
All right.
so here's the idea, all right? I'm going to ask you a few questions. What motivated you, why you're there? Like, what motivated you to go? I know some of you are there with family and some of you aren't. And then tell us a little bit about your experience of Aliyah, right? Was it difficult? Was it hard to acculturate? And then, what are you doing now? How are you integrated into Israel society? Ready for that? All right, so we'll take turns. Yeah, we'll go across however you want to do it. 1, 2, and 3. How did you get to Israel? What was the motivation? And how did you end up making Aliyah?
So I made Aliyah with my family when I was 15. But my parents are originally from the States, from New Jersey and Ohio. And then we moved to Israel and my parents wanted to stay here forever. Like they moved after high school and met each other here. And then unfortunately it wasn't working out so well financially. So they moved back to the States. And then that's where I was raised until high school. And then we all made Aliyah. She did the whole, I answer all 3 years.
No, just one at a time, yeah. And
Yeah.
right, so you got there with your family, and I think part of your family story exemplifies the challenge of Aliyah, and you mentioned the financial challenge, right? It's hard for people to find work, right? If they don't speak the language, if they don't have connections and contacts, and I mean, speak the language, but not, like a Sabra, not like, but so it's challenging. Like my father needed my brother, his son-in-law to read him the phone bill. He's fluent in Hebrew, but he just couldn't figure out all those technical words that he had never come across. So it's a real challenge. Okay, who's next? How did you get to Israel?
I made Aliyah when I was 18. And yeah, I went to a year of learning of Israel and fell in love with the land and Israel and the people. And I made Aliyah.
Okay, so you had experience on an Israel program as a teenager, and that was your inspiration. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I'd say that, and Zionist household. Yeah.
And schooling, yeah, and bearing. Yeah, that's good. So you had you grew up with a connection with Israel. We visited several times, yeah, and
strong love for the land connection, and this is I decided this is where I want to live.
All right, and then so one more question about we learned about you did not Yisrael, Am Yisrael, right? Eretz Yisrael. So you mentioned the word land of Israel. So what does the land of Israel mean for you?
I'd say the land of Israel means place for, in what terms?
Land of Israel, yeah. It does mean the earth, does it mean the people, does it mean the streets?
I'll answer this one.
Abigail likes the
I love
land
this
of
question.
Israel. Yeah.
Whenever I think of the land of Israel, it reminds me, well, specifically in like the biblical terms, I hear like the land of Israel, and it like reminds me of the strong history that we have to the land itself. And then I always like think of like the land is of milk and honey is what they compare.
Yeah.
But they said Israel was like, so that's what I think of, like a place, like a warm, sweet place where it's like a melting point for all Jews.
Beautiful, yeah. Warm milk. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, who's next?
I made Aliyah when I was 18 also.
Sophie, do I have that right? Sophie?
Yes, my name is Sophie. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Yeah.
And yeah, I made Aliyah 2 weeks after I graduated high school with a program called Green Sabar for lone soldiers. So I did the Army. So yeah, I moved 6 months after I got here. I drafted. I served 2 years, 8 months. I just got out last July, and now I'm doing kind of a prep year program for new immigrants just to get a really high level of Hebrew before going to university. And then I plan on starting university next fall in 2023.
And what was your motivation for making Aliyah?
I went to a very Zionist summer camp, URJ camp, and that was hands down the main reason I even knew about the program Green Sabar and had so much love for Israel.
Reform movement?
Yeah.
Beautiful. And which camp was it?
Osrui in Wisconsin.
Beautiful. And so it was Israeli song night, Israeli.
Yeah, kind of Israeli counselors, and I loved them. And I always wanted to go there. Even before I went to Israel for the first time, I knew that I wanted to make Aliyah and go to the Army.
Wow. And so what was your role in the Army?
I was in combat intelligence, which is with the yellow beret. Probably some of the stuff you did was, you're not able to. Yeah, some stuff secret, but you can ask me. I can probably answer.
Combat, so what does that mean? Combat intelligence. So I know combat.
So the intelligence unit is called Modi'in in Israel. So my unit's under that. Basically, we're just like the ground people doing reconnaissance. I was also a drone operator and a medic. So we have a lot of like cool photography stuff, cameras, drones, do a lot of camouflage.
What's camouflage?
Like when we go on operations, we'll hide ourselves kind of in.
You were part of the ground or part of the.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
The unit I was in is actually the only all-female combat unit in the Army. So that was really cool. And yeah, we did everything.
That is quite remarkable. Kol hakavod.
Thank you.
Yes, and instead of army, there are other choices. Maya,
Probably
Abigail?
not for everyone. That's what I would say.
Probably not for everyone. Yeah, Maya is probably not ready for combat.
What's that supposed to mean? So Abigail and I did I did 1 year and Abigail did 2 years of it's called a program called the National Service, which is another alternative to the army, also through the government, but different from the army. So I worked in a museum in the Old City in Jerusalem as a tour guide, and Abigail worked in the government press office for 2 years.
All right, Abigail, tell us about that.
Yeah.
Government press.
I was mainly working with foreign press, but also a lot of overlap with the Arab press in Israel. So giving them credentials into Israel, helping them like fly to different places, getting them into events or into Gaza, and then also organizing events. And then I would also go and film and write articles.
Wow.
They're my main jobs there in a nutshell.
Interesting. Tell me about getting Arabs visas into Israel.
Yeah, so there's 3 different types of Arabs. We have Israeli Arabs, which only need a press card like any other Israeli. And then there are
which is proves the Constitution is democratic and free. Yeah, Israeli Arabs are treated like Israeli Jews in that regard.
Mm-hmm. And then the Palestinians who are journalists, they have to have, any Palestinian who wants to come into Israel has to have a permit, a working permit. So I would just do background checks and make sure everything's in order and then give them the permit to come into Israel.
Is that true for all foreigners trying to enter the land?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, it's much easier for Palestinians. Well, not easier. It's it's different, but very similar to what any other foreigner has to have. The difference is any foreign journalist who comes in has to have a visa, and a Palestinian only needs to have a work permit. They don't need a visa to get in. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. So
third category was
And then the third category is foreign. So Al Jazeera Al Jazeera English, for instance, or French, they have workers in France that are working that need to get into Israel. So I would give them visas to get here.
Got it. All right. And how has it been integrating into Israeli society? Right. So I think what I understand, this is like you 3 live together and you're all Americans, American born. So tell us about the challenge of integrating into mainstream Israeli society. The army probably, Sophie, the army probably helped.
Yeah, so at the beginning, it was very challenging for me to the point where I barely talked because I wasn't confident with my Hebrew. I didn't feel like they knew me. I was also the only American in my basic training squad, so that was really hard to not even have one person that I feel like kind of related to me. Oof. I always felt like I had 2 different personalities, like my personality in English, which was my normal one, and then my Hebrew personality, which is how they all saw me. And it was really hard, but once my Hebrew got better, that was just the key.
How long did that take?
Once it started getting better, I would say I was about a little less than a year in the army, and it took me like 2 full years of being in Israel before I was like, okay, I'm good at Hebrew now. I'm not scared to talk to random people. And
right.
So yeah,
the culture was fine. The key was the language, right? Yeah, because you're all doing the same stuff, so you're a team.
Yeah. I don't know. The culture is still hard in some ways, but it's just something that you have to get used to. Otherwise, I know people who have already left because one of the things they can't deal with the culture and how people are here.
So it's more than language. It's also just the differences in the culture.
I would say it's the language for sure. And then it's also just the attitude that you have. to deal with the Israeli attitude.
So let's go there. Maya, you want to talk about the Israeli attitude?
Yeah, the Israeli attitude is very interesting and different. I happen to like it, so which is why we all live here. But
What's the difference? Yeah.
the difference is I'm sure it's been written about and spoken about a lot, so I don't know what exactly it is. But
What does it feel like? What does it feel like?
Feels much more of a community, much more real, much more just close knit, whereas everyone in Israel has each other's backs. Like you just feel it on the street that no matter what, like even if you're from all these random different places throughout the world, throughout Israel, like everyone is there and connected through something. Like we all have to take the same buses, we all walk the same streets, like everyone really feels.
If I can expand one story.
Please do.
We had a neighbor just now who had locked herself out of her apartment and we're like, oh, I happen to know her. So I was like, Sarah, like come upstairs until you figure it all out. And she's like, wow, thank you so much. Like 4 people stopped me already and asked me if I wanted to go up to their apartment until I figured it out. So I feel like that's like in a nutshell of like
taking care of each other.
Yeah.
So what about
everyone
ready to
has
help.
each other's
Yeah.
back.
Right. And Americans are known, I think, around the globe as polite and sensitive. So yeah, tell us a little about the Israeli honking and yelling.
I mean, yeah, that's just kind of what I meant is you need to know how to deal with their attitude. I feel like we were talking about it in one of my classes a few months ago that my teacher is originally from Australia. She was like, in Australia, if you go on a bus, like no one's gonna look you, everyone's gonna look down, first of all. And here on Israeli buses, you walk in and people aren't afraid to stare you, look you up and down. You know, things like that. And also no one stands in a line. People.
Right. So that's how Rabbi Estes we were talking about. He was waiting. He was first in line. He came a half an hour before the bus came, and he was first in line, and he ended up like last getting on the bus.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Everything with timing is just really different here. We're just talking about if you have a doctor's appointment, you know it's not going to happen when you get the appointment. It's going to be probably an hour after. And they're going to send you somewhere because they forgot to do something and you need to go do this or you need to call someone. There's
Right.
also like the community aspect, but also I feel like with healthcare and bureaucracy and stuff, it's very much like dependent on you and you need to figure out how to stand up and advocate for yourself.
Right. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Otherwise,
Right.
no one cares about you. No one's going to go out of their way to help you unless you prove that, you're going to do something too.
Right. Good. And the other story, I have 2 stories about that. So I'm looking for reflections on those stories. One is, I think Maya and I went to an ice cream place in near the Shuk, and I was standing patiently with my money in my hand, and they just kept coming and buying and buying and buying. I say, like, when is it my turn? It's never your turn. Yeah.
No, it's always your turn.
Yeah,
That's the mindset.
Literally,
It's
that's
always
physically.
your turn.
Yeah,
But
no
yeah.
one's ever going to come up and ask you
Yeah,
if you
no
need
one's
help
gonna
or
ask
if you
you.
need something.
Yeah.
You have to do
Right.
that.
Right.
Yeah.
So it definitely teaches you how to self-advocate and stand
But
up.
also when you ask for help,
Right, but
people
when-
will help. You just have to be able to
Yeah.
ask for it yourself.
You have to be able to ask, and
And then people are happy to help. Just like
Yeah.
that.
There is
That's
that. So 2 more stories and reflect. One is I was at there's no one else there. I was in a shop and I was standing there and the owner was looking at me and I was looking at him and I was waiting for, hi, can I help you? But no, it didn't come.
no.
We stared at each other for like 20 seconds, like, are you ready for me or not ready for me? So that's part of the culture, right, that I'm hearing is to be.
I'd say also the culture is very fast-paced, much more fast-paced than
right.
places in America. So also, the shopkeeper is just waiting for you to do your thing and then come to him. And instead of coming up to you slowly, he's just waiting for you to buy something.
Yeah, he's not going to do your job.
Yeah,
for
he's
you.
not going to do your job. for you. That's what in his head he's thinking.
Good. So I'm in a optical store looking for frames, and
Right.
also nobody helped me, and so I was looking around, and then I heard a fight break out behind me, and I turned around, and it's the owner yelling at a customer that those glasses look horrible, you know. Try these on. Yeah, so there's just a lot of heat, right? Like you can imagine in the Middle East in general. Right? Jerusalem is, right, symbolizes fire, right? In our, right, so earth, water, right, wind, but Jerusalem is fire, right? So tell us a little about the fast-paced and the right, lack of politeness, right? Cultural differences. So I'm getting at.
Yeah.
High school.
Do you get yelled at? Do people yell at you occasionally?
Yes.
Yeah. When I
For
first
what?
moved in high school, and I was on one hand very, very grateful that I moved in high school and was able to integrate earlier on, but also some parts were just like, what is happening here? Like lunch was, you have to go get the food, and if you don't push your way, there won't be enough food for you. And I'd be like, why don't they just make more food? And they're like, no, you just have to go and get it. And I'll be like, but why would I go and like elbow someone to get my food? Like that's just so rude. And I couldn't like wrap my head around. Whereas in Israel, it's just like a completely different mindset, which is, okay, you have to feed yourself. Go get the food, or
Right.
else you're not gonna get. So it's like that with, I don't know, with a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I became, but then also like I would become friends with I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to push and shove. So I would become friends with the chef, and then they would just cook food on the side for me. So it's just like figuring out, like, I didn't want to, I like the American politeness. So like trying to find the right balance of not being completely Israeli and then, but also
Right.
keeping the American politeness.
And have some workarounds. Yeah. So it's one more question, then we'll open it up. Today, right, Yom HaZikaron into Yom HaAtzmaut. Tell us about your love of Israel. Yeah. Now that you're there, your feelings. I don't know, the emotional stuff that comes with Yom HaAtzmaut, watching the flags, right, and the people. Yeah, tell us a little about the emotions of Yom HaAtzmaut.
All right, I'd say the Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut transition is pretty intense. Like this morning at 11 a.m., we had a siren for 2 minutes long, where the entire country, no matter what you're doing, anything, you just stop. I'm sure you've seen pictures and videos and things, but it's really crazy to experience it. And
like, what's crazy mean? Yeah.
What? It's very emotional. It is. It's crazy. It is. The intense part is that everyone in Israel knows someone who died in the army or from terrorist attacks. But every family knows someone who died, which makes it very, very intense and very much more personal. Like you can ask anyone on the street, like who they know or what happened, and someone can name a story or tell something of someone, which, yeah, it just makes it much more personal.
Right.
And
Good.
yeah, and just
different than America. In America, we have Memorial Day, right?
Right.
And really only the veterans, people.
Right. So yeah, Memorial Day is very different from Yom HaZikaron than it is here. In Yom HaZikaron, everyone wears white and black. And then tonight and tomorrow, everyone wears white and blue. But everyone in the country knows that it's Yom HaZikaron, and all the stores close. It's a very somber day. The schools end early, and
Yeah, everyone knows to
there's
be
no
respectful
sales.
of it,
Everyone
so.
knows to be respectful. Like it's very quiet
I never
in the afternoon.
feel less Israeli than on Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. It's the hardest days for me because when I grew up in America, I mean, I knew like one person who is currently serving in the US military as like a chaplain. So like way older, all like not really so connected. And Memorial Day was always just a fun day. And I went to a Jewish day school, so we celebrated Yom HaZikaron, and I was very aware of Israel. And I had like a cousin who died in the army, but I never felt like I was part of this Israeli culture of like where everyone, when you walk on the street, is just like, I mean, I don't know how to explain it because I still don't fully understand it. And definitely nothing like of what it was like in America. And then usually people go to the synagogue in between, like it's packed, the synagogues tonight, in between Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, which is a very like surreal of everyone like first just somber and praying and sad, and then it turns into this tremendous
Joyous celebration.
yeah, where everyone's just dancing and singing and like truly proud of their like nation. And then you'll see like tonight everyone's going to be out with their kids till all the kids stay up till like 10 or 11, concerts everywhere, and then like people are out partying till God knows, yeah, it's like 7 and like till
Gotcha.
tomorrow. Yeah, so
That's disconnection for you because you didn't personally suffer losses. Yeah.
and I feel like I don't know, I feel this like jealousy towards Israelis who have this like deep
Pride.
emotional high and the low, and I feel a little bit like now a little less over the years, but like intruding
Oh, wow.
special day in a way.
Sophie, are you going to serve in the reserves? And do you go back to the
I
army?
am, yeah, technically from the day I got released, I'm then like a reserve. I can be called to reserve duty.
Yeah.
I haven't yet for my combat position, but for my medic position, I've already been called 4 times actually, just because they needed help with Corona. And I didn't go. It wasn't like mandatory, but they were asking for help.
Right. In times of war, you'd likely be called back.
Yeah, if I do, I'm guessing also just because I am a woman, it would mostly be for like a combat medic. If they're going into Gaza, they need more medics in the area or something.
Okay.
So I'm not too worried, but yeah, I did have to like keep my boots. They're under my bed to go back.
Keep your boots. Yeah. That's a powerful phrase. Yeah. In reality. So can you talk about Yom HaZikaron from a soldier's perspective?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this year for sure. I feel a lot more disconnected because this is my first time not being in the army since I've been in Israel.
Okay.
And I was thinking back to last year on this day when my officer screaming at us to like go line up by the flags before the siren starts, everyone turn off their phones and whatever. And then this year I was just in my bed when it happened. So it was really weird.
Right. And connection to fallen soldiers? Do you have a connection there?
I know not anyone personally. I knew other lone soldiers in the time while I served that unfortunately either committed suicide or something happened like that. Actually, where I served, that was the most cases of death. They still show it as that on Yom HaZikaron. Like they still, like on our base, we would have ceremony and whatever usually on the day, and they would show a slideshow of all of the soldiers who served in our base who passed away while in service. And unfortunately a majority of them, at least where I was, were actual suicides and not combat related death.
Because of to what you owe that, the stress of combat or something?
I mean, I don't know them, but I'm assuming, yeah.
Right.
They
PTSD.
still count as, you know, dying fallen soldiers. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So I'll put it up for a couple minutes. If you have some, when do you go out and party? When does that happen?
As soon as we finish this Zoom meeting.
So yeah, if anybody has any questions, they can. But not only 1 or 2 questions because they gotta go party. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I have one on Rachel. What's the social and dating life like? How interesting.
Good question.
Social and dating.
I'm dating an Israeli now.
So I just got broken up with by an Israeli about a month ago.
So it's interesting you're dating Israelis and not Americans. Is that deliberate, or is that just are they, they're better boyfriends? How does that work?
I did not think personally I would date an Israeli. He just was
Yeah,
really
I guess
nice
I
to
never
me.
thought I would either. I didn't think that they could relate to me in a way that I would be able to, like with humor and stuff like that. But
Mhm. But it worked.
The language.
mhm. Yeah, she speaks fully Hebrew with her boyfriend.
Yeah, best Hebrew classes ever.
Yeah, and you can make that's the hardest part, right? Making jokes. That's
Yeah.
Right.
okay. Life seems so normal, Diane says, with the conflict we hear about. Life seems so normal. You're talking as if, right? Life is normal. And we hear about there's some spate of bombs recently, yeah, and attacks. How do you handle that? Are you scared? Does that frighten you in a personal way?
I'd say that over the past wave of terror attacks that we had, there were people were more scared, but the difference in Israel is people aren't more scared, they're just more aware. It is scary and it is, terrifying, but the solution in Israel is to not stay at home and not to just seclude yourself and to just not go outside. The solution is to what most people feel is to continue on with your day, but learn how to be aware, just make sure safety measures, everything is in place, that you're with people and protocols on buses and everything. But
hand free open.
yeah, just one hand open at all times. Just everyone knows like how to look around, keep your eyes open.
What's one hand open mean?
Well, a lot of terrorists that are like doing stabbings or shootings, they're usually not so professional
Or skilled.
So if you have your right or your dominant hand open, like without a phone, or you're more aware of what's happening and also much faster to react.
Oh, I see. Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, this is just a good tip, but so if you see like someone coming, you can block them, or they show a study when you can like do this at your house if you want, but have like two things in your hand and then someone comes. They say a lot of times with like guns, you're not allowed, if you're carrying your weapon in Israel, you're not allowed to have anything in your hand,
You're
in
right.
one of your hands, so that you're quickly able to reach and take action. But so it also helps, even if you have no weapon on you, but to have it free open, just to run or to think faster. Yeah.
Yeah, you're
So
occupied.
stuff like that. Yeah, that really help.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. That does answer the question a little bit, right? That your awareness. Yeah.
Yeah.
And last thing, and how about chefetz chashud, and then we'll end on a high note. So tell everybody what chefetz chashud is.
Sophie, you got this. A suspicious object.
Yeah.
Oh,
If someone sees a bag, they call the police just in case. But people don't really I mean, now bombs are usually
Right,
like
it's
either
more-
rockets or
Chefetz
guns.
chashud was it's more of an old news.
Yeah.
That's what I was about.
We don't have many chefetz
Terrorists
chashuds anymore.
aren't doing bombs anymore.
Right, terrorists don't really use bombs anymore, so it's not as big of a
Terrorists use
right.
the army is really good, the intelligence at least,
Yeah.
about knowing when people are, usually
Planning
when people are
attacks.
planning stuff like that, like big things or building stuff,
Yeah, with bombs,
usually
it's much
we can
easier
get
to tell.
intel before it even
Mhm.
happens, and then just no one knows.
I was going to ask about that. How deep is the intelligence? Like, can you describe how deep it goes?
It's really good.
They know Israel has a
everything.
map of every single thing that's happening.
Everything.
There's
They have
cameras
They're in all of our phones, but
everything.
it's just like, it's important.
and
Yeah.
everyone
No one has privacy in Israel.
right.
Right. That's
Whoever
not.
told you they think they have privacy. I mean, neither in America, but way more in Israel, way less in Israel.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. And all right, so let's end on a happy note. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us what your plans are tonight. Yeah.
We are going to travel the Merkaz of Israel, the center of Israel. What?
You're getting on buses?
Yes, so we're gonna go on buses. We're gonna go to we live we live on the outskirts of Tel Aviv in a city called Givat Shmuel, which is very central in Israel. So we have all different little cities and all kinds of places around us. So we're gonna go to Petach Tikva. Then there's
All
like,
the streets have like tons of concerts.
so it's everything is just
Everyone-
outdoors. You
every
can go
Israeli-
anywhere.
big
Every
part of it
Israeli is
having
outside right
concerts.
now.
Yeah.
And
You're going to
There's
Tel,
just-
Fireworks.
right.
you're going to
Ara.
Tel Aviv?
So we probably won't make it to Tel Aviv.
Where are you
So
going?
we're gonna stay local. We're gonna go to Petach Tikva, to Kiryat Ono. We are gonna go, what else?
Ramat
Ramat Gan is right here.
Love Ramadan.
And then ended off in Givat Shmuel.
And then ended
because
off in Givat Shmuel right here.
Statik Ben El.
And
And
what
his
time?
Vashkesh, which are like the coolest pop artists,
Ah,
as I'm told by my Israeli boyfriend, are coming here.
what's their names? What's their names?
Statik Ben
Static
El.
and Benel.
Static and Benel. And Aaron knows them, yeah. And,
Yeah.
uh,
You know them too.
It's gonna
You
be
just
lit.
don't know the names.
now, a last question. What time?
You definitely know them, Rabbi.
Yeah, you totally know them.
What time will you be home?
Today,
Tonight, yeah.
11 o'clock.
It's Yom
Really?
HaAtzmaut. She doesn't need
No,
a
I'm just
curfew.
kidding.
11 tomorrow.
11.
It's an all-nighter? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, maybe. We don't know.
What time? I'm asking what time?
Oh, here and there.
We're going to see where the night takes us. That's the Israeli way.
Yeah,
All
you don't.
right.
You
It's
can't
No
plan
time
it.
limits.
You can plan it.
It's an actual party. I got you.
Right.
Okay.
We'll just see what's happening. Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. I hope you have fun and stay safe and be home by midnight.
I will. Thank you. We will.
We
All
will.
right, Abigail and Sophie and Maya took our bye.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for
Thank you.
having us.
Yeah.
And Chag Sameach.
Yeah.
Chag Sameach.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.